What would you do if your billionaire mother-in-law wore a white, floor-length silk gown to your wedding, seated your side of the family next to the swinging kitchen doors, and used her reception toast to basically call you a charity case? Well, that is exactly what happened to Kendra. But do not worry, because by the time this story is over, that same arrogant, racist mother-in-law is going to lose her entire multi-million-dollar fortune in the most humiliating way possible. Before we dive into this insane story of toxic in-laws, old money, and ultimate karma, make sure to hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and comment where you're watching from down below. I always love seeing where you guys are tuning in from. Now, let's get into the drama. The day Kendra married Darren was supposed to be a flawless fairy tale. Darren was kind, handsome, and fiercely supportive. He also happened to be the sole heir to his late father's massive real estate empire. The wedding was held at a sprawling, historic estate, covered floor to ceiling in imported white roses. But there was a dark cloud hanging over the crystal chandeliers, and her name was Beatrice. Beatrice was Darren's mother. She was a widow who sat on a mountain of generational wealth, and she made absolutely no secret of her absolute disgust that her son was marrying a black woman. Beatrice never used obvious slurs. She was too obsessed with her high society image for that. Instead, she weaponized her wealth through constant, agonizing microaggressions. The nightmare started before the ceremony even began. While Kendra was getting her makeup done, Beatrice waltzed into the bridal suite wearing a dress that was undeniably bridal white. When Kendra's sister politely pointed it out, Beatrice just offered a cold, venomous smile and said, "Oh, please. In our circles, this is considered champagne, but I wouldn't expect you to know the difference." It only got worse at the reception. Kendra walked into the grand ballroom and immediately noticed the seating arrangement had been changed. Her parents, aunts, and uncles, hardworking, proud people who had flown across the country to be there, were shoved into a dark corner table right next to the noisy kitchen doors. Meanwhile, Beatrice's country club friends were front and center. But the true breaking point was the toast. Beatrice clinked her champagne glass, took the microphone, and addressed the 300 guests. She spoke at length about Darren's pedigree, his expensive education, and his bright future managing the family funds. Then she turned her icy gaze to Kendra. "And of course we welcome Kendra," Beatrice purred into the microphone, her tone dripping with condescension. "Darren has always had such a big heart. He loves a rescue project. Kendra works in, what is it again, dear? A laboratory, playing with test tubes for the government. It is just so sweet that Darren supports her little hobbies." To the bride and groom. The room fell dead silent before a smattering of awkward applause broke out. Darren squeezed Kendra's hand under the table, his face red with anger, but Kendra just took a deep breath and kept her chin high. She wasn't some gold digger after Beatrice's trust funds, and her little hobby was actually grueling, underfunded biomedical research that she was deeply passionate about. She spent her days trying to cure diseases, while Beatrice spent hers agonizing over the thread count of her napkins. As the night ended and the newlyweds drove away from the venue, Kendra leaned her head against the window. She had married the man of her dreams, but as she thought about Beatrice's cold, mocking smile, she realized a terrifying truth. The wedding was over, but the war for her husband's soul and her own dignity had only just begun. She just had no idea how far Beatrice was willing to go to destroy her, or how spectacularly it was going to blow up in the old woman's face. The honeymoon phase for Kendra and Darren lasted exactly as long as their actual honeymoon in the Maldives. The second their plane touched down back home, the suffocating reality of Beatrice set in. You see, Darren might have been the heir to a real estate empire, but his mother still held the keys to the castle. Beatrice controlled the family trusts, the board seats, and most importantly, the purse strings. And she used every single dollar to keep her son on a tight leash, and to remind Kendra exactly where she stood. Kendra wasn't in it for the money. While Beatrice spent her afternoons sipping martinis at the country club, Kendra was pulling 12-hour shifts at the lab. She was pouring her heart into biomedical research, tracking down complex data that could one day save lives. But to Beatrice, hard work wasn't admirable. It was low class. "I just don't understand why you insist on working like a common laborer," Beatrice would sigh during their mandatory Sunday brunches, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet. "Darren can buy you anything you want. It's almost embarrassing for the family name, you coming home smelling like chemicals. What are you even trying to prove?" The breaking point for this new chapter of their lives happened during Beatrice's annual summer gala at the family estate. Kendra had just come off a brutal, exhausting week at the lab and simply wanted to support her husband. But Beatrice saw an opportunity to put Kendra in her place in front of her wealthy, high-society friends. Instead of introducing Kendra to the guests as her daughter-in-law, Beatrice treated her like the hired help. When a tray of appetizers ran low, Beatrice turned to Kendra with a sickeningly sweet, fake smile. "Kendra, dear, be a doll and run to the catering kitchen to fetch more of the crab puffs. You just blend in so much better with the staff than I do." Darren immediately stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Mom, stop it. Kendra is my wife, not your maid." Beatrice just fluttered her eyelashes, playing the victim. "Oh, Darren, don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. Goodness, the two of you are so dramatic. People these days just can't handle old-fashioned opinions." But they weren't old-fashioned opinions. They were calculated, racist attacks designed to make Kendra feel small, unworthy, and out of place in their world of old money. Later that evening, Beatrice even had the audacity to loudly comment on Kendra's elegant, natural hair, telling her friends it was so brave to wear something so urban to a formal gathering. Darren was furious. He wanted to cut his mother off completely, but he was trapped. If he walked away, Beatrice threatened to freeze his assets and lock him out of the company his father had built. Late that night, Kendra held a frustrated Darren in their kitchen. She looked him in the eyes and told him not to fight Beatrice on her terms. Kendra had her own career, her own mind, and her own dignity. Beatrice's money meant absolutely nothing to her. Beatrice honestly thought she was untouchable. She believed her vast fortune made her a queen, entirely immune to consequences, while she looked down on everyone else. But Beatrice was about to learn a very hard lesson. All that arrogance and all those millions didn't make her a queen. It just made her a massive, glittering target. And the predator she was about to invite into her life was charming, ruthless, and exactly what she deserved. Beatrice was a predator in her own right. She had absolutely no idea how to spot one lurking in the wild. She spent so much time looking down on people like Kendra that she completely forgot to watch her own back. And that was the exact blind spot Julian exploited. Julian stepped into Beatrice's life a few months later at a high-society art auction. He was the picture of silver fox sophistication, an impeccably tailored tuxedo, a vague, charmingly European accent, and an air of quiet, old-world money. While the rest of the room was mingling, Julian's eyes were locked dead on Beatrice. When a terribly ugly but terribly expensive antique vase came up for bidding, Beatrice raised her paddle. A second later, Julian raised his. They went back and forth until the price reached a ridiculous sum. Julian won the bid, but 10 minutes later a waiter approached Beatrice's table and placed the vase right in front of her, along with a handwritten note on thick gold leaf paper. The note read, "A beautiful artifact belongs in the hands of a truly beautiful woman. Julian." From that moment, Beatrice was completely hooked. Julian swooped in and launched a masterclass in love bombing. He took her on whirlwind dinner dates to the city's most exclusive restaurants. He sent her massive bouquets of imported orchids every single morning. He even gifted her a stunning, heavy gold necklace that looked like it cost a fortune. Though if Beatrice had looked a little closer, she might have noticed the clasp was suspiciously flimsy. But Beatrice didn't look close. She was too busy basking in the attention. For the first time since her husband passed away, Beatrice felt young, desired, and totally invincible. But Julian wasn't just seducing her with romance. He was seducing her ego. He listened to her complain about Darren and Kendra, and instead of telling her she was being unreasonable, he validated every single toxic, racist thought she had. "It is a tragedy, really," Julian would say, swirling a glass of expensive scotch in her drawing room. "A woman of your breeding and elegance, forced to endure such vulgarity. Your son simply doesn't understand the importance of lineage. You are entirely right to protect your family's legacy from outsiders who just want a piece of your wealth." To Beatrice, Julian wasn't just a wealthy, handsome billionaire. He was an ally. He made her feel completely justified in her cruelty toward Kendra. With Julian whispering in her ear, Beatrice's ego swelled to a dangerous new size. For a few short weeks, Darren and Kendra actually enjoyed the peace and quiet. With Beatrice completely distracted by her new romance, the nasty phone calls stopped, and the passive-aggressive text messages dried up. Kendra was finally able to focus all her energy on an upcoming make-or-break government grant presentation for her biomedical research. But the peace was just an illusion. It was the calm before the storm. Because with Julian feeding her superiority complex, Beatrice was gearing up for her most vicious attack on Kendra yet. And she was about to make a move so spiteful, it would unknowingly set the stage for her own total destruction. If you thought Beatrice was toxic before, you haven't seen anything yet. With Julian whispering in her ear and feeding her delusions of grandeur, Beatrice's cruelty shifted from passive-aggressive jabs to straight-up, calculated sabotage. And her target was the one thing Kendra cared about outside of her marriage: her career. Kendra was gearing up for the most important week of her professional life. She was the lead researcher pitching for a massive, multi-million-dollar government grant. If she secured this funding, it would revolutionize her biomedical lab, fund groundbreaking trials, and secure her team's jobs for the next decade. She was running on black coffee and 3 hours of sleep a night, meticulously fine-tuning complex data sets on her laptop. Her entire presentation, the culmination of years of relentless work, was sitting right there on that hard drive. Enter Beatrice. Knowing perfectly well how stressed Kendra was, Beatrice suddenly declared that she and Julian were coming over to Darren and Kendra's house for an intimate, absolutely mandatory family dinner. Darren tried to say no, but Beatrice pulled her usual trump card, casually threatening to pull the financing on one of Darren's pending real estate developments. Left with no choice, Darren ordered expensive catering and tried to keep his mother and her new beau contained in the dining room while Kendra worked furiously in her home office down the hall. But Beatrice wasn't there for dinner. She was there to assert dominance. Halfway through the evening, Beatrice deliberately wandered down the hall holding a brimful glass of deep red vintage Merlot. She pushed open the door to Kendra's office without knocking. Kendra barely had time to look up from her screen before Beatrice tripped on the totally flat edge of the area rug. A tidal wave of dark red wine splashed directly across Kendra's open keyboard. The laptop screen flickered violently, hissed, and then went completely, devastatingly black. Kendra froze in her chair, her heart plummeting into her stomach. Beatrice just stood there, her designer dress completely dry, offering a theatrical, exaggerated gasp. "Oh heavens, my hand just slipped," Beatrice said, her voice completely devoid of actual guilt. She looked at the ruined, dripping machine and let out a soft, mocking sigh. "Well, perhaps this is the universe giving you a sign, Kendra. A sign that a wife should be out hosting her guests and tending to her husband, rather than hiding away playing with silly little science projects." Darren rushed into the room, horrified by the scene. He completely lost it, finally yelling at his mother to get out of their house. Beatrice simply adjusted her jewelry, took Julian's arm, and sashayed out the front door with a smug, satisfied smirk on her face. She genuinely thought she had won. She thought she had finally broken the poor, working-class outsider. But Beatrice deeply underestimated who she was dealing with. Kendra didn't cry and she didn't throw a tantrum. She was a scientist. She was trained to prepare for catastrophic system failures. The exact moment the front door clicked shut, Kendra calmly walked over to a fireproof safe in her closet, pulled out an encrypted, heavy-duty external drive, and plugged it into Darren's desktop computer. She had backed up every single file to the cloud and a hard drive barely 20 minutes before Beatrice walked in. Kendra pulled an all-nighter, rebuilding her presentation flow, and the next morning, running on pure, unfiltered adrenaline, she walked into that government boardroom and delivered the pitch of a lifetime. She survived the sabotage, but the dynamic had permanently shifted. The polite smiles were gone and the gloves were completely off. Kendra was done trying to keep the peace with her racist mother-in-law. And as the adrenaline faded, Kendra's brilliant, analytical mind began to shift its focus from biomedical data to the mysterious, overly perfect man who was suddenly pulling Beatrice's strings. Julian thought he had everyone in that family entirely fooled, but he was about to get put under a microscope. Kendra didn't just survive Beatrice's laptop stunt, she absolutely crushed her government pitch. But while she waited for the final grant results, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was incredibly wrong. And it wasn't just Beatrice, it was Julian. Beatrice, eager to rub her fabulous new romance in Kendra's face and pretend the wine-spilling incident never happened, demanded that Darren and Kendra attend a lavish, catered dinner at her estate. Beatrice wanted to formally celebrate Julian's upcoming business expansion. But while everyone else was eating caviar and listening to Julian boast, Kendra was quietly doing what she did best, analyzing the data. Kendra was a biomedical researcher. Her entire career was built on spotting microscopic inconsistencies, identifying flawed data, and seeing the truth when the variables didn't add up. And as she sat across the mahogany dining table, observing Julian, the red flags started multiplying like a virus. First, it was his stories. Julian casually mentioned finalizing a massive shipping deal over dinner at a notoriously exclusive, Michelin-starred restaurant in Geneva just last month. But Kendra's former lab partner was Swiss, and Kendra distinctly remembered her mentioning that specific restaurant had permanently closed during the pandemic. Then it was his vocabulary. For a man who supposedly made his billions in international finance, he misused basic economic terms, confusing liquid assets with gross revenue in a way no actual billionaire ever would. But the absolute smoking gun was sitting right on Julian's left wrist. He was wearing what he loudly claimed was a rare, vintage Patek Philippe watch. He made sure the heavy gold timepiece caught the light from the chandelier all night. But Kendra had an eye for detail. When Julian reached across the table to pour more wine, Kendra stared at the watch face. The second hand wasn't sweeping in the smooth, continuous motion of a high-end mechanical movement. It was ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Just like a cheap $50 quartz knockoff from a mall kiosk. The gold casing was just a little too brassy, and the leather strap was slightly fraying at the seams. Kendra didn't say a word at the table. She waited until dessert was served, then gave Darren a look and asked Beatrice if they could speak privately in the study. Once the heavy oak doors were closed, Kendra laid out the facts, calmly and methodically. She wasn't malicious. She was genuinely trying to protect her husband's family from a predator. She told Beatrice about the closed restaurant, the bizarre financial jargon, and the painfully fake luxury watch. She begged Beatrice to just run a simple, quiet background check before getting any more serious. Beatrice's reaction was explosive. Her face turned a mottled, furious shade of purple. She didn't just reject the warning. She took it as a calculated, vicious attack. "How dare you?" Beatrice shrieked, slamming her hand down on her mahogany desk. "You sit at my table, eating my food, and you have the audacity to slander a man of Julian's caliber, because he's wealthy, because he's everything your people are not." Darren stepped in between them, telling his mother to back down, but Beatrice was entirely unhinged. "I see exactly what this is," Beatrice yelled, pointing a shaking, diamond-ringed finger at Kendra. "You are terrified. You see me happy. You see me with a man who understands real wealth, and you are terrified that I'm going to spend the inheritance you've been scheming to steal. You are nothing but a jealous, gold-digging outsider trying to ruin my happiness so you can keep my family's fortune for yourself." There was no reasoning with her. Beatrice was completely blinded by her own ego and her desperate need to feel superior. Darren grabbed Kendra's hand, told his mother they were done, and walked out of the mansion. As they drove away into the night, Kendra felt a chilling sense of finality. She had tried to do the right thing. She had tried to save the woman who had made her life a living hell. But Beatrice had locked the doors, boarded up the windows, and handed the matches directly to the arsonist. The countdown had officially begun. The fallout from the explosive fight in the study was exactly the catalyst Julian had been waiting for. Like a true predator, he smelled the blood in the water. He knew Beatrice was feeling isolated, angry, and utterly desperate to prove her daughter-in-law wrong. So he wrapped his arms around her, poured her another glass of expensive scotch, and sprung the ultimate trap. A week after the disastrous dinner, Julian sat Beatrice down in her drawing room with a solemn, serious look on his handsome face. He told her about a once-in-a-lifetime, incredibly exclusive investment opportunity. It was an invite-only offshore luxury development in Dubai, reserved exclusively for the absolute top tier of the global elite. The returns, he promised, would quadruple her net worth in less than 6 months. There was just one tiny, fabricated catch. Julian claimed his primary funds were currently tied up in a frustrating, bureaucratic Swiss tax audit. If he didn't secure the founder's tier by the end of the week, the spot would go to a Russian oligarch. He just needed a temporary, highly lucrative partnership. He needed liquid cash immediately. For a split second, the ghost of Beatrice's late husband, a shrewd, cautious businessman, might have whispered in her ear to stop. But then Beatrice thought about Kendra. She thought about the urban, working-class girl who had dared to lecture her about money and fake watches. The sheer, spiteful desire to multiply her fortune, to secure it so thoroughly that Darren and Kendra could never touch it, completely blinded her. "I will do it," Beatrice declared, her ego taking the wheel. "I will show them exactly how real wealth operates." What happened next was a masterclass in financial self-destruction. Beatrice went completely rogue. Because she controlled the primary estate and the bulk of the family trusts, she didn't need Darren's signature. Moving with a manic, obsessive energy, she visited her bankers and her wealth managers. When they advised caution, she fired them on the spot, accusing them of being unimaginative cowards. Over the course of 3 frantic days, Beatrice systematically dismantled the empire her late husband had spent 40 years building. She took out a massive, high-interest mortgage on the historic family estate. She liquidated her entire blue-chip stock portfolio, paying exorbitant early withdrawal penalties. She even drained the primary liquid trusts. Millions upon millions of dollars were rapidly converted into wire transfers and sent straight into a series of shadowy, offshore LLCs controlled entirely by Julian. When the ink dried on the final transfer, Beatrice felt like a conqueror. She had done it. She was completely independent, fiercely wealthy, and tied to a sophisticated billionaire who truly understood her worth. She was so smug that she couldn't resist twisting the knife. That afternoon, she left a gloating voicemail on Kendra's phone. "Hello, Kendra," Beatrice sneered into the receiver, her voice dripping with aristocratic triumph. "I just thought you should know that Julian and I have entered into a massive private venture. It's the sort of high-level finance you wouldn't understand, but let's just say my net worth is about to quadruple. I suggest you keep playing with your little test tubes, dear, because you and Darren will never see a dime of this fortune. Cheers." Beatrice hung up the phone, poured herself a glass of vintage champagne, and waited for Julian to return to the estate to celebrate. She had pushed all her chips to the center of the table, betting everything on her own superiority. She had no idea she was playing at a table that didn't even exist. Julian stood in the grand marble foyer of the estate, an expensive leather weekender bag resting at his feet. He took Beatrice's hands in his, kissing her knuckles with that practiced, European charm. "I am off to Zurich, my darling," Julian murmured, looking deeply into her eyes. "I just need to sign the final deeds and bypass this ridiculous tax audit. I will call you the absolute second my plane touches the tarmac. Get ready for our new life." Beatrice watched him slip into a black town car and drive through the massive wrought iron gates. She spent the rest of the day floating on air, sipping champagne and browsing catalogs for a new yacht. When evening rolled around, she checked her phone. Nothing. She figured the flight was delayed. By the next morning, panic began to creep in. Beatrice dialed Julian's number. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again an hour later and then again after that. By noon, the automated voice on the other end delivered the first crushing blow. "The number you have reached has been disconnected and is no longer in service." Her heart hammering against her ribs, Beatrice drove her Mercedes down to her primary bank, demanding to speak to the wealth manager she had screamed at just 3 days prior. She demanded they track the wire transfers. She needed to know the money had landed in the Dubai accounts. The manager looked at his screen, his face draining of color, and then looked back up at her with a mixture of pity and horror. There was no Dubai account. The millions of dollars Beatrice had liquidated, the massive loans she had taken out against the family estate, the drained trusts, all of it had been wired into a labyrinth of untraceable, offshore dummy corporations. Within minutes of the funds landing, they had been scattered across the globe, converted into cryptocurrency, and vanished completely. When the authorities were finally called, the FBI Cybercrime Division didn't even look surprised. They took one look at the photograph Beatrice provided of her sophisticated billionaire and sighed. His name wasn't Julian. He wasn't a shipping magnate. He was a notorious, highly skilled international romance scammer who specifically targeted wealthy, isolated widows with a superiority complex. He hadn't just taken her money, he had taken everything. A week later, Beatrice sat completely alone in the sprawling, freezing drawing room of the estate. The electricity had been shut off. The bank had officially initiated foreclosure proceedings, and her designer luggage was packed by the front door because she had nowhere else to go. Her immense, racist pride, her desperate need to feel superior to her hard-working, brilliant daughter-in-law, had cost her the entire family empire. She was utterly, devastatingly penniless. Across town, in her modest home office, Kendra's laptop pinged with a notification. It was an email from the federal government regarding her biomedical grant. She took a deep breath, clicked open the attached PDF, and her eyes widened as she read the first line. Everything was about to change. The ultimate role reversal was officially in motion. But I have to ask you, what would you do if the person who made your life a living hell, who attacked your race, your career, and your marriage, suddenly lost everything and had to beg you for a roof over their head? Do you think blood is thicker than water, or do you leave them out in the cold to sleep in the bed they made? Let me know in the comments below. Does Beatrice deserve a shred of mercy, or did she get exactly what was coming to her? If you want to see what happens when Kendra opens that email, becomes a millionaire breadwinner, and holds Beatrice's fate in the palm of her hands, you have to tune in for part 2. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the epic conclusion to this story. I'll see you in the next one.